Behind the golden gates of Westmore Palace, where photographers capture only perfect smiles and royal waves, lies a truth that would surprise the world. The Duchess of Westmore, beloved by millions for her grace and poise, faces the same sleepless nights, temper tantrums, and homework battles that challenge parents everywhere. But, when you're raising the future king and his siblings under the watchful eyes of a nation, every scraped knee becomes front-page news, and every parenting decision carries the weight of centuries-old tradition. For the first time ever, the Duchess pulls back the velvet curtain on royal family life, revealing how she navigates bedtime stories in a world where her children's every move is scrutinized, how she teaches empathy to kids who will inherit unimaginable privilege, and what happens when a future monarch throws a tantrum in the grocery store. This is not the fairy tale you think you know. This is the real story of raising royal children in a modern world that demands both ancient protocol and authentic humanity. What she shares will change everything you thought you knew about life inside the palace walls. The alarm clock showed 5:47 a.m. when Duchess Catherine of Westmore heard the familiar patter of small feet racing down the marble hallway toward her bedroom. She knew, even before the door burst open, that it would be Prince Alexander, her 8-year-old heir to the throne, his sandy hair sticking up in every direction and his favorite dinosaur pajamas wrinkled from a restless night's sleep. "Mummy, I had that dream again," Alexander whispered, climbing onto the massive four-poster bed that had belonged to queens for 3 centuries. "The one where everyone is watching me and I forget what to say." Catherine wrapped her arms around her eldest son, feeling his small body tremble slightly. These dreams had been occurring more frequently since his 8th birthday, when the palace announced he would begin participating in more public ceremonies. The weight of his future seemed to press down on his young shoulders like an invisible crown, and Catherine's heart ached watching him grapple with a destiny he never chose. "Tell me about the dream," she said softly, stroking his hair as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains. Outside, she could already hear the distant click of cameras from the photographers who maintained their constant vigil beyond the palace gates. Alexander buried his face in her shoulder. "I was standing in front of all those people at the ceremony next week, and they were all looking at me, waiting for me to say the words grandfather taught me. But I couldn't remember anything. My mind went completely blank, and everyone started whispering. Then, I heard someone say I wasn't ready to be king." Catherine felt a familiar stab of maternal protectiveness mixed with the unique challenges of raising a future monarch. How do you comfort a child who must learn to carry the hopes and expectations of an entire nation before he's even lost his baby teeth? "Do you know what I think about when I feel nervous in front of crowds?" she asked, tilting his chin up to meet his worried green eyes. Alexander shook his head. "I think about you and Princess Isabella and little Prince James sleeping safely in your beds. I think about Daddy reading bedtime stories and the way you laugh when James tries to copy everything you do. I remember that behind all the titles and ceremonies, we're just a family who loves each other very much." A small smile tugged at the corner of Alexander's mouth. "Even when James puts jam in my school shoes?" "Even then," Catherine laughed, remembering the chaos from the previous morning when 5-year-old Prince James had decided his older brother's shoes needed improving with strawberry preserves. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the thundering arrival of Princess Isabella, their 6-year-old daughter, who burst through the door with the dramatic flair she'd inherited from her paternal great-grandmother. Her long dark curls bounced as she launched herself onto the bed, followed more cautiously by James, who was clutching his stuffed elephant and wearing mismatched socks. "Mummy, Mrs. Henderson says I have to wear the itchy dress for the charity luncheon today," Isabella announced with the indignation only a 6-year-old princess could muster. "I want to wear my football kit. Why can't princesses play football at fancy parties?" Catherine exchanged a glance with Alexander, who was now grinning at his sister's rebellious spirit. This was the daily reality of their lives, navigating between royal protocol and normal childhood desires, between public expectations and private family moments. "Because," James piped up in his sweet 5-year-old voice, "Mrs. Henderson says we have to look appropriate." "Appropriate," Alexander corrected gently, ruffling his little brother's hair. "That's what I said," James insisted, causing all of them to laugh. Catherine looked at her 3 children, each so different yet bound together by both love and an extraordinary shared destiny. Alexander, thoughtful and sensitive, already showing the careful consideration that would serve him well as a future king but sometimes making him seem older than his years. Isabella, spirited and determined, questioning every rule and tradition with the fearlessness Catherine secretly admired. And James, sweet and observant, the baby of the family who brought lightness to even the most formal occasions with his innocent observations and infectious giggle. "Let's make a deal," Catherine said, pulling all three children closer. "We'll talk to Mrs. Henderson about finding a compromise for the luncheon. Maybe a dress that's comfortable enough for you to move freely, Isabella. And, Alexander, we'll practice your speech for next week's ceremony, but we'll also remember that even kings are allowed to be nervous sometimes." "What about me?" James asked, not wanting to be left out of the negotiations. "You, my little prince, get to help Daddy with his morning run in the garden, which means you get to wear your trainers instead of formal shoes until breakfast." The children cheered at this small victory over royal protocol, and Catherine felt that familiar warmth that came from these precious unguarded moments. These were the times when they weren't the future king, the princess, and the spare heir. They were simply Alex, Izzy, and Jamie, her babies who still needed cuddles when they had bad dreams and got jam on their school clothes. The sound of a gentle knock interrupted their family huddle. Catherine's personal secretary, Mrs. Morrison, appeared in the doorway with the apologetic expression she wore whenever duty called during family time. "Your Royal Highness, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but the Prime Minister's office has called. There's been a development with the education reform bill that requires your attention before the vote this afternoon." Catherine felt the familiar tug between her roles as mother and Duchess. The education bill was particularly close to her heart. It focused on mental health support for children, inspired partly by her own experiences watching Alexander struggle with the pressures of his position. "Mummy has to work now, doesn't she?" Isabella observed with the perceptiveness that sometimes caught Catherine off guard. For a little while, Catherine confirmed, kissing each child on the forehead. "But, remember what we talked about. Being part of this family means we all have responsibilities, but it also means we take care of each other." Alexander straightened his shoulders, and Catherine could see him shifting into his future king mode. "I'll help Isabella and James get ready for breakfast," he said seriously. "And I'll make sure Alexander doesn't forget to eat," Isabella added, always ready to take care of her older brother despite their frequent sibling squabbles. "And I'll. James thought hard, I'll make everyone laugh." As Catherine watched her children organize themselves with the natural teamwork they'd developed over years of sharing this unique life, she felt both pride and a deep ache. They were growing up too fast, forced to mature beyond their years by circumstances beyond their control. After the children headed off to get dressed for the day, Catherine stood at her bedroom window, watching the photographers position themselves for the day's shots. In a few hours, images of her family leaving for their various engagements would be splashed across newspapers worldwide. The headlines would analyze everything from Isabella's dress choice to Alexander's expression, searching for clues about their personalities, their futures, their worthiness to lead. What the cameras wouldn't capture was the vulnerability in Alexander's voice when he shared his fears, or the fierce independence in Isabella's spirit, or the pure joy James brought to every moment. They wouldn't see the real bedtime battles, the homework struggles, or the way the children comforted each other during thunderstorms. Catherine had spent years perfecting the art of the public smile, the graceful wave, the appropriate response. But, lately, she'd been feeling an overwhelming urge to share the truth about their lives. Not the scandals or controversies that tabloids craved, but the genuine, complicated reality of raising children who would inherit not just wealth and privilege, but the weight of service to millions of people. The education bill vote today was just one example of how their personal experiences shaped their public work. Alexander's anxiety about public speaking had opened her eyes to the mental health challenges facing all children, not just those born into royal families. Isabella's questions about why girls couldn't do certain things had inspired Catherine's advocacy for gender equality initiatives. Even James's innocent observations often provided insights that influenced her charitable work. As she prepared for her morning meetings, Catherine made a decision that had been building in her heart for months. She would accept the invitation from the documentary filmmakers who had been requesting interviews for their project on modern monarchy. But she wouldn't give them the sanitized, carefully scripted responses they expected. She would tell the real story, the beautiful, messy, challenging truth about raising future leaders in a world that demanded both ancient tradition and contemporary relevance. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. For years, she had protected her children's privacy, carefully controlling what the public knew about their family life. But perhaps it was time to help people understand that behind the titles and tiaras were real children facing real challenges, and parents trying their best to prepare them for extraordinary responsibilities while keeping their childhoods intact. She thought about Alexander's dream, about the pressure he already felt at just 8 years old. Maybe if people understood the human side of their lives, they would be more patient with the next generation of royals. Maybe they would see Alexander not as a symbol to be judged, but as a child to be supported as he grew into his destiny. The morning sun was fully up now, painting the palace gardens in golden light. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Isabella arguing with her governess about hair ribbons, and James giggling at something that had caught his attention. Normal sounds of childhood that somehow felt more precious because of their extraordinary setting. Catherine smiled as she headed toward her office, knowing that whatever challenges the day brought, she would return that evening to help with homework, mediate sibling arguments, and tuck 3 remarkable children into their beds. The crown might define their future, but love would always define their family. As she passed the portrait gallery where centuries of monarchs gazed down with solemn expressions, Catherine whispered a promise to the painted faces of her husband's ancestors. She would raise these children to honor their legacy while remaining true to themselves. She would prepare them for their roles while protecting their spirits. And, maybe, just maybe, she would help the world see that even princes and princesses put their pants on one leg at a time, sometimes with jam-covered fingers and dinosaur pajamas, but always with the hope that tomorrow would bring new adventures and the courage to face them together. 3 weeks after that transformative morning, Catherine found herself sitting in her Range Rover outside St. Margaret's Preparatory School, watching Alexander trudge slowly toward the entrance with his backpack dragging behind him. The same little boy who could discuss historical treaties with visiting dignitaries was struggling with basic arithmetic homework, and the weight of that contradiction sat heavily on Catherine's chest. "He looks sad again," observed Isabella from the back seat, her usually bright voice tinged with concern for her older brother. Catherine's heart clenched as she watched Alexander pause at the school gates, his shoulders sagging under more than just his heavy backpack. The previous evening's homework session had ended in tears, not the dramatic kind that Isabella specialized in, but the quiet, defeated tears that were somehow more heartbreaking. "I'm stupid at maths, aren't I, Mummy?" Alexander had whispered the night before, his math worksheet crumpled in his small fist. Kings are supposed to be smart about everything. That moment had shattered something inside Catherine. Here was her 8-year-old son, already internalizing the impossible expectation that he must excel at everything simply because of his birthright. The same boy who could name every dinosaur species and explain the water cycle with scientific precision was convinced he was failing because long division didn't come naturally to him. "Mummy, are you crying?" James asked from his car seat, his voice filled with the confusion that comes when the adults in your world show vulnerability. Catherine quickly wiped her eyes and turned to smile at her youngest. "Just thinking about how much I love you all," she said, which was true, even if it wasn't the complete truth. After dropping the children at school, Catherine didn't return directly to the palace as scheduled. Instead, she found herself driving to the small village of Millbrook, 20 minutes away, where she'd heard about a remarkable primary school that was taking an innovative approach to education. Millbrook Community Primary sat in a converted Victorian building, its playground filled with vegetable gardens and outdoor learning spaces. Catherine had read about their philosophy of teaching to each child's strengths rather than forcing every student into the same academic mold. On impulse, she'd called ahead and asked for a tour, introducing herself simply as Mrs. Wales, a mother interested in educational approaches. The head teacher, Mrs. Sarah Chen, greeted her with warm professionalism, clearly recognizing her visitor but graciously maintaining the fiction of anonymity. As they walked through classrooms where children worked in small groups, moving freely between different learning stations, Catherine felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced in months: hope. "We believe every child is intelligent in different ways," Mrs. Chen explained as they observed 7-year-olds building mathematical concepts with colorful blocks while others wrote stories inspired by the school's therapy dog.
Some children are mathematical thinkers, others are artistic, some are natural leaders, and others are quiet observers who see patterns others miss.
Our job is to nurture all of those intelligences. Catherine watched a boy about Alexander's age confidently explaining his science project to a group of younger children. His presentation skills were remarkable, but she noticed he had notes written in pictures rather than words, and his mathematical calculations were worked out with physical objects rather than abstract numbers. Tommy struggles with traditional academic subjects, Mrs. Chen said quietly, following Catherine's gaze. But he's brilliant at understanding how things work together, at seeing the big picture. Instead of making him feel stupid about what he can't do, we celebrate what he can do and find ways to build the other skills through his strengths. The words hit Catherine like a revelation. This was exactly what Alexander needed, not more pressure to conform to traditional academic expectations, but recognition that his particular kind of intelligence was valuable and worthy of celebration. They visited a classroom where children were learning history by acting out historical events, their laughter echoing through the halls as they debated whether King Arthur would have preferred pizza or fish and chips. Another group was learning about fractions by dividing up treats for a teddy bear's picnic, making abstract mathematical concepts concrete and meaningful. What about children who will have unusual responsibilities in their futures? Catherine asked carefully. How do you prepare them for leadership roles while still letting them be children? Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. Every child will have responsibilities that are important to them and their communities. Some will lead countries, others will lead families, some will lead businesses, and others will lead social movements. The principles are the same. We help them develop confidence in their own abilities, empathy for others, and the resilience to handle challenges. As they walked through the art room, where children's paintings covered every surface in a riot of color and creativity, Catherine saw a small girl working intently on a portrait. The painting showed a family, mother, father, and 3 children, but, instead of faces, each figure had symbols where their features should be. A crown for one child, a football for another, a book for the third. That's beautiful, Catherine said, kneeling beside the young artist. Can you tell me about your painting? The girl, who couldn't have been more than 6, looked up with serious brown eyes. It's about how people see us versus who we really are, she said matter-of-factly. Like, everyone knows my daddy is a doctor, but they don't know he makes the best pancakes and reads voices for all the characters in my bedtime stories. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. This child, barely older than Isabella, had grasped something that adults often missed, the difference between public roles and private selves. Mrs. Wales, Mrs. Chen said gently, would you like to see our social-emotional learning program? They entered a cozy room filled with bean bags and soft lighting, where a group of children sat in a circle with their teacher. Catherine recognized the setup immediately. It was a feelings circle, something she'd been considering implementing at home for her own children. Today we're talking about when we feel overwhelmed, the teacher was saying. Remember, all feelings are okay, and there are always strategies we can use to help ourselves feel better. A boy with red hair raised his hand. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed when everyone expects me to be good at football because my dad was good at football. But I like reading better. That's really brave to share, Marcus, the teacher responded. Who else has felt pressure to be something they're not sure they want to be? Several hands shot up, and Catherine's heart ached as she listened to these young children articulate feelings that Alexander expressed in his quieter moments. The universality of childhood struggles, even for children whose circumstances were vastly different from her son's, was both comforting and heartbreaking. After the tour, Mrs. Chen walked Catherine to her car, both women maintaining their polite fiction even as they discussed deeper truths. Every child deserves to be seen for who they are, not just who they're expected to become, Mrs. Chen said as they paused beside the Range Rover. Even children with extraordinary destinies need permission to be ordinary sometimes. Driving back to the palace, Catherine's mind raced with possibilities. She thought about Alexander's tear-stained face from the night before, about Isabella's constant questions about why she couldn't do certain things because she was a girl, about James's growing awareness that his family was different from his friends' families. That afternoon, instead of attending the scheduled meeting about her upcoming charity gala, Catherine sat down with her private secretary and made several phone calls. By evening, she had arranged for educational consultants to visit the palace, not to tutor her children in traditional subjects, but to help design a learning approach that honored their individual strengths while preparing them for their unique futures. When Alexander returned from school that day, his usual cheerful demeanor dampened by another difficult math lesson, Catherine was waiting with a surprise. "How would you feel about trying a different approach to learning?" she asked as they sat together in the family sitting room, James building with blocks nearby and Isabella practicing cartwheels on the carpet. Alexander looked up from his homework with cautious hope. "What kind of different?" "The kind where we figure out how your amazing brain works best, and then we use that to help you with everything else," Catherine said, pulling him onto her lap. "Remember how easily you learned about the Commonwealth countries when we used the map with all the pictures and stories?" Alexander nodded eagerly. "That was fun. It didn't feel like studying." "Exactly. What if we could make maths feel more like that? What if we could find ways for you to use your love of stories and history to understand numbers?" For the first time in weeks, Alexander's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Could we really do that?" "We can really try," Catherine promised. "And, Isabella, what if we found ways for you to learn about leadership and responsibility through some of the activities you love, like sports and drama?" Isabella stopped mid-cartwheel. "You mean I could learn princess stuff by playing football?" "I mean you could learn leadership skills, problem-solving, and teamwork, all things that excellent princesses need to know." "What about me?" James asked, looking up from his blocks with the serious expression he wore when he didn't want to be left out. Catherine gathered all three children around her. "You, my sweet boy, get to help us figure out how to make learning feel like playing, because you're the best at finding joy in everything." That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the conversation was livelier than it had been in weeks. Alexander shared ideas about how they could turn his history lessons into stories, Isabella planned elaborate scenarios for learning about diplomacy through sports competitions, and James announced that he wanted to learn numbers by counting everything in the palace, starting with the suits of armor. Prince William joined them as they were discussing their educational revolution, and Catherine filled him in on the day's discoveries. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I remember feeling exactly like Alexander when I was his age. Everyone expected me to excel at everything immediately, and, when I struggled with certain subjects, I thought it meant I wasn't fit to be king." Alexander looked up with surprise. "You felt stupid sometimes too, Daddy?" "Many times," William admitted. "But I learned that being a good king isn't about being perfect at everything. It's about understanding people, caring about others, and being willing to keep learning and growing. And being brave enough to ask for help when you need it," Catherine added, squeezing Alexander's hand. That night, as Catherine tucked each child into bed, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Alexander fell asleep with a smile on his face, clutching a book about mathematical patterns in nature. Isabella had fallen asleep planning a football match where teams would represent different countries and learn about international relations. Even James had drifted off while counting the stars visible from his bedroom window. Later, as Catherine and William sat together in their private sitting room, she shared her growing conviction that their children's education needed to be revolutionary in its approach. "What if we're not just changing how our children learn," she mused. "What if we're modeling a different way of thinking about childhood and development for families everywhere?" William considered this. "You mean showing that even future monarchs benefit from individualized, strength-based education?" "Exactly. What if Alexander's struggles with traditional academics become a way to advocate for all children who learn differently? What if Isabella's questions about gender roles help other families have important conversations? What if James's natural curiosity becomes a reminder that learning should be joyful?" As they talked late into the night, Catherine felt the pieces of a larger vision coming together. The documentary project she'd agreed to wasn't just about sharing their family's story, it was about challenging assumptions and creating space for all children to be seen and valued for who they are, not just what they're expected to become. Outside their window, the palace grounds were quiet except for the distant sound of security patrols. But, inside, in the rooms where three remarkable children slept peacefully, a quiet revolution was beginning. It was a revolution built on the radical idea that even future kings and queens deserve childhoods filled with joy, discovery, and the freedom to learn and grow at their own pace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to model a different way of approaching childhood and education. But tonight, Catherine fell asleep knowing that her children would wake up in a world where their unique gifts were celebrated, where their struggles were met with understanding rather than judgment, and where their worth wasn't measured by their ability to fit into predetermined molds. The most important lesson they were learning wasn't about mathematics or protocol or public speaking. It was about the courage to be authentically themselves, even when the world was watching. The crisis came, as crises often do, on an ordinary Tuesday morning when everything was supposed to go perfectly according to plan. Catherine had spent weeks preparing for the documentary filming, carefully choreographing scenes that would show their family's authentic life while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The children had been briefed, the palace staff coordinated, and every detail had been considered. None of that preparation mattered when Isabella announced at breakfast that she absolutely would not participate in the filming because it's all fake anyway. "Sweetheart, what do you mean by fake?" Catherine asked, setting down her coffee cup and giving her 6-year-old daughter her full attention. Isabella crossed her arms with the determined expression that usually preceded their most challenging conversations. "You told us we were going to show people what our real life is like, but then Mrs. Morrison gave us all those rules about what we can and can't say." "Real life doesn't have rules about being real." From across the breakfast table, Alexander looked up from his cereal with interest, while James continued eating his toast, blissfully unaware of the philosophical bombshell his sister had just dropped. Catherine exchanged a glance with William, recognizing the uncomfortable truth in Isabella's observation. In their efforts to protect their children's privacy while still sharing their story, had they created something artificial? "You're absolutely right," Catherine said after a moment, causing Isabella's eyes to widen with surprise. "Would you like to help us figure out a better way?" What followed was the most honest family meeting they'd ever had. Sitting in their private sitting room, with the documentary crew waiting patiently in another wing of the palace, the family discussed what authentic sharing actually meant. "I don't want people to see me crying about math homework," Alexander said quietly. "But I also don't want to pretend I'm good at things I'm not good at. I want people to know that princesses can play football and have messy hair sometimes," Isabella added. "But I don't want them to think I'm not serious about important things too." James, who had been playing with his toy cars during the discussion, suddenly piped up with the clarity that sometimes emerged from his 5-year-old wisdom. "Maybe we just act like ourselves and forget about the cameras?" William laughed. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said, ruffling James's hair. "What if that's exactly what we do?" When Catherine finally called the documentary director into the room, she had a proposal that would either make for extraordinary television or complete disaster. "We're going to try something different," she announced. "Instead of staged scenes, we want you to simply follow us through a normal week. No scripts, no predetermined topics, just our real life as it happens." The director, Marcus Webb, looked both excited and terrified. "Your Royal Highness, that's quite risky from a public relations standpoint. What if difficult moments arise? What if the children have meltdowns or disagree with royal protocol?" Catherine looked at her children, all 3 of them listening intently to the adult conversation. "Then, people will see that royal children are still children, and royal parents are still parents trying to do their best." "But, Mummy," Alexander said thoughtfully, "what if people judge us when we're not perfect?" It was Isabella who answered before Catherine could respond. "Then, they're the ones with the problem, not us," she said with the fierce confidence that Catherine both admired and worried about. The first day of filming under the new arrangement was a revelation. Without the pressure of performing perfectly, the children relaxed into their natural personalities. Alexander's genuine curiosity shone through as he asked thoughtful questions during a visit to a children's hospital, his empathy evident as he listened carefully to each child's story. "Why does chemotherapy make people's hair fall out?" he asked Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the pediatric oncologist guiding their tour. When she explained the medical reasons, Alexander nodded seriously and then asked, "Is that why some of the children wear such beautiful headscarves? To make something scary into something pretty?" The doctor smiled.
That's a very wise observation, Your Highness. Just Alexander is fine, he said politely. We're all learning here together.
The cameras captured Isabella's natural leadership skills as she organized an impromptu football game in the hospital's recreation room, making sure every child who wanted to play found a position that worked with their medical limitations. When one little girl said she couldn't run because of her leg braces, Isabella immediately redesigned the game. You be the special advisor, she told the girl seriously. You tell everyone the best strategies because you can see the whole field from your position. James, meanwhile, had appointed himself the official cheerleader and was leading an enthusiastic chant that had both patients and medical staff laughing. But it was the quieter moments that proved most revealing. Later that day, as they drove home, Alexander sat quietly in the car, processing what he'd seen. "Mummy," he said finally, "those children were really sick, but they seemed happy."
How can people be sick and happy at the same time?
Catherine considered her answer carefully.
What do you think? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. I think maybe being happy doesn't mean everything is perfect. Maybe it means finding good things even when there are bad things too.
The cameras had captured this conversation, and Catherine realized they were witnessing something profound, her 8-year-old son developing the emotional intelligence that would serve him well as a future king, but, more importantly, as a human being.
The second day brought different challenges.
Isabella had a spectacular meltdown when she discovered that her favorite dress was being dry cleaned and she would have to wear something else to the charity luncheon. "I hate being a princess," she shouted, throwing herself dramatically onto her bed. "I can't wear what I want, I can't say what I think, and everyone expects me to be perfect all the time." Catherine's instinct was to ask the cameras to stop rolling, but she caught herself. This was exactly the kind of moment they'd committed to sharing, the reality behind the fairy tale. Instead of trying to calm Isabella quickly, Catherine sat on the bed beside her daughter and let her express her frustration fully.
"Being a princess is really hard sometimes, isn't it?" Catherine said when Isabella's tears had slowed.
"Yes." Isabella sniffled. "And people think it's all pretty dresses and parties, but it's also rules and schedules and everyone watching everything you do."
"You're absolutely right," Catherine agreed.
"Those parts are really difficult."
"But, can you think of any parts that you do like?" Isabella considered this. "I like that people listen when I talk about important things.
Like when I told the headmaster at school that the playground needed better equipment for children who use wheelchairs, and he actually made changes." "That's the real power of being a princess," Catherine said. "Not the fancy dresses or the titles, but the ability to help make things better for other people."
The documentary cameras captured the entire conversation, including Isabella's thoughtful response, so being a princess isn't about being perfect. It's about caring about people and trying to help.
Exactly, Catherine confirmed. That evening, as they watched the rough footage from the day, Catherine was amazed by what they'd captured. Without the artificial structure of scripted scenes, the children's genuine personalities had emerged. Alexander's thoughtfulness, Isabella's passion for justice, James's ability to find joy in any situation, all of it was there, unfiltered and authentic. But it was the third day that brought the breakthrough moment Catherine hadn't expected. They were filming a typical morning routine when James, who had been unusually quiet during breakfast, suddenly announced, "I don't want to be a prince anymore." The room fell silent.
Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. "Can you tell us why?" Catherine asked gently, lifting James onto her lap.
"Because princes have to do important things, and I'm not good at important things," James said, his lower lip trembling. "Alexander is smart and Isabella is brave, but I'm just little." Catherine felt her heart break and mend simultaneously.
"Oh, my sweetheart. Can I tell you a secret about being little?" James nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve.
"Being little is actually a superpower," Catherine said seriously.
"Do you know why?" James shook his head. "Because little people see things that big people miss. Like yesterday at the hospital, you noticed that Mrs. Peterson looked sad even though she was smiling.
You gave her a hug that made her feel better. Alexander and Isabella didn't see that because they were focusing on other important things, but you saw what mattered most.
I did? James asked, brightening slightly. You did. And, when we visited the elderly people's home last month, you remember how you just sat with Mr. Thompson and listened to his stories?
That was incredibly important, even though it seemed little. Isabella had been listening to this conversation with growing understanding. James, she said seriously, you make everyone feel better just by being yourself.
That's the most important job of all.
Alexander nodded in agreement. And, you always know when someone needs a hug or wants to play.
That's not little, that's really big. The cameras captured James's face transforming as he processed this new understanding of his role in the family and the world. So being a prince means being good at caring about people? He asked.
The very best princes are, Catherine confirmed. That evening, as the family debriefed about the day's filming, Catherine realized they had documented something unprecedented, a real conversation about identity, purpose, and self-worth in a royal family. No palace PR team could have scripted something so authentic or powerful.
Do you think people will understand? Alexander asked as they prepared for bed. I think people will see that we're a family just like theirs in many ways, Catherine said.
We worry about our children, we want them to be happy and confident, and we're all still learning and growing together. But we're also different, Isabella added pragmatically.
We have bigger responsibilities.
True, Catherine agreed. But the feelings and challenges are often the same. Every parent wants their child to find their strengths and feel valued.
Every child wonders if they're good enough or if they belong.
As Catherine tucked each child into bed that night, she reflected on how much had changed in just 3 days of authentic sharing. The children seemed more confident, more aware of their own worth, and more understanding of their unique roles in the family and the world. But the most significant change was in Catherine herself. For years, she had carried the weight of protecting her children's privacy while preparing them for public life. The documentary experiment had shown her that authenticity itself could be protective, that showing her children as real, complex, growing human beings might actually serve them better than any amount of careful image management. The footage from these 3 days would challenge many assumptions about royal life, about childhood, and about the balance between privilege and responsibility. But, more importantly, it would show the world that behind every title, every expectation, and every tradition were real people trying to love each other well while navigating extraordinary circumstances. As Catherine fell asleep that night, she could hear James giggling in the next room as Alexander told him a bedtime story, while Isabella sang softly to herself as she organized her books for the next day. These sounds, the ordinary music of childhood, were perhaps the most revolutionary thing they could share with the world. The phone call came at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday, jarring Catherine from sleep with its urgent tone. Sir Robert Fairweather, the palace communications director, rarely called the family directly unless there was a crisis requiring immediate attention. Your Royal Highness, his voice was strained, I'm afraid we have a situation with the documentary footage.
Catherine sat up in bed, instantly alert.
Beside her, William stirred, recognizing the tone that meant their private family world was about to collide with their public responsibilities.
What kind of situation, Robert? Clips from yesterday's filming have leaked online.
Someone with access to the rough footage has shared segments on social media.
The response is unprecedented. Catherine's stomach dropped.
Yesterday had been particularly revealing. They'd filmed the children's after-school routine, which included Alexander's tutoring session for his ongoing struggles with mathematics, Isabella's heated discussion about why she should be allowed to join the boys' cricket team, and James's innocent questions about why some people were mean to his family in the newspapers.
How bad is it?
William asked, now fully awake and reaching for his own phone. That's just it, Your Royal Highness, Sir Robert said, his voice carrying a note of confusion.
It's not bad at all.
The public response is overwhelmingly positive, but it's also intense. #RealRoyals is trending worldwide, and people are sharing their own stories about children's struggles with learning differences, gender equality, and dealing with public scrutiny.
Catherine and William exchanged glances. This was uncharted territory. What exactly was leaked? Catherine asked.
the segment where Prince Alexander discusses feeling stupid about mathematics and, then, works through a problem using his historical knowledge to understand the concept. Princess Isabella's passionate speech about why girls should play cricket.
And Prince James asking why people write mean things about families they don't know.
As Sir Robert continued explaining the situation, Catherine felt a mixture of violation and curiosity. These were deeply personal moments they'd shared with the documentary team, never intended for immediate public consumption. The response is quite remarkable, Sir Robert continued.
Educational advocates are praising the way you handled Alexander's learning differences. Feminist organizations are celebrating Isabella's spirit.
Child psychology experts are commenting on James's emotional intelligence. But, Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss how to respond to this breach of privacy and whether to continue with the documentary project. An hour later, Catherine sat in the palace's secure communications room, scrolling through thousands of social media posts that had emerged overnight. What she found surprised her. A mother from Manchester had posted, watching Prince Alexander struggle with math and seeing his mom respond with patience and creativity instead of frustration gave me hope for my own son's learning journey. A father from Edinburgh wrote, Princess Isabella's confidence in challenging unfair rules inspired my daughter to speak up about inequality in her school's sports programs. A teacher from Birmingham shared, the way the royal family talks to their children about difficult emotions is exactly what we try to teach in our social-emotional learning programs.
But it wasn't just praise.
There were also critics questioning whether the royal family should share their children's struggles publicly, debates about privilege and accessibility to resources, and concerns about the long-term impact on the children themselves. One particularly thoughtful post came from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a child psychologist whose work Catherine had followed. What we're seeing isn't exploitation of royal children, but rather a masterclass in emotional validation, strength-based learning, and resilient parenting. These conversations normalize struggle and celebrate growth, exactly what all children need. When the children came down for breakfast, they were immediately aware that something significant had happened. Palace staff were moving with unusual urgency, phones were ringing constantly, and their parents had that particular focused expression that meant important decisions were being made.
Are we in trouble? Isabella asked directly, never one to avoid difficult topics.
Catherine and William had discussed how to handle this conversation during their brief strategy meeting with the communications team.
Not trouble exactly, Catherine said carefully.
But some of the filming from yesterday has been shared online before we were ready, and now people all over the world are talking about our family.
Alexander looked concerned. Are they saying bad things?
Actually, most people are saying very kind things, William explained. But it's complicated because this wasn't supposed to happen yet, and we need to decide how to handle the situation.
What kind of things are people saying? Isabella asked with characteristic directness.
Catherine pulled up her tablet and selected some of the more appropriate comments to share. People are saying that Alexander is brave for being honest about finding math difficult, and that they're proud of how hard you work to learn in your own way.
Alexander's face lit up with surprise. Really? They don't think I'm dumb? Absolutely not, Catherine assured him.
Many people are sharing stories about their own children who learn differently, and teachers are talking about how your approach might help other students.
What about me? Isabella asked.
People are celebrating your passion for fairness and equality, William said. Some schools have even started conversations about making their sports programs more inclusive because of what you said. Isabella straightened with pride.
Good. That's what I wanted.
James, who had been listening carefully while coloring in his notebook, looked up with his usual perceptiveness.
Are you worried about us?
The simple question cut to the heart of Catherine's concerns. We want to make sure that sharing our story helps people instead of hurting our family, she said honestly.
But, Mummy, Alexander said thoughtfully, remember when you told us that being royal means using our position to help others? Maybe this is how we can help. The wisdom in her 8-year-old's observation took Catherine's breath away.
That afternoon, the family held an unprecedented meeting with the documentary team, communication staff, and child welfare experts to discuss how to move forward. The children insisted on participating in the discussion about their own privacy and the impact of sharing their stories.
"I think we should keep filming," Isabella announced with typical confidence. "But maybe we should talk to people about why we're doing it."
"What do you mean?" asked Marcus Webb, the documentary director.
"Like, tell people that we're sharing our real life because we want other children to know that everyone struggles with things sometimes, and that's okay," Isabella explained. Alexander nodded enthusiastically. "And maybe we could meet some of the families who wrote nice things about us? I'd like to talk to other kids who find math hard." James, not to be outdone, added his own suggestion: "Can we show people how to be kind when they talk about families online?" Dr. Patricia Thornton, the child psychology consultant they'd brought in, was visibly moved by the children's responses.
"What we're seeing here is remarkable emotional maturity and a genuine desire to help others. These children understand the potential positive impact of their story." The decision to continue the documentary project, but with modifications based on the overnight social media response, marked a turning point for the entire royal family. They would proceed with filming, but they would also engage directly with the public conversation their story had sparked. Catherine proposed an innovative addition to the documentary: filmed conversations between the royal children and other families facing similar challenges. Alexander would meet with children who had different learning styles, Isabella would connect with young advocates for gender equality, and James would participate in discussions about emotional intelligence and kindness. The first of these conversations took place the following week, when Alexander met with Lucy Chen, a 9-year-old from London who had dyslexia, and Marcus Thompson, an 8-year-old from Cardiff who was gifted in mathematics but struggled with reading comprehension. "I used to think I was the only kid who found school hard sometimes," Alexander said as the three children worked on a puzzle together. "But now I know lots of kids learn differently. My teacher says my brain just processes information in a special way," Lucy explained. "Like, I can understand really complicated things when I hear them, but reading the same information is really hard." Marcus nodded eagerly. "And I can do really hard math in my head, but writing essays about what I'm thinking is super difficult." "So we're all smart in different ways," Alexander concluded. "That's actually really cool." The camera captured not just their conversation, but the visible relief and confidence that came from children realizing they weren't alone in their struggles. Isabella's session was equally powerful. She met with Sarah Ahmed, a 10-year-old who had successfully campaigned for her school to add girls' football to their sports program, and David Martinez, a 7-year-old boy who loved ballet despite facing criticism from some classmates. "The hardest part isn't other people saying you can't do something," Isabella reflected during their conversation. "It's when you start believing them and thinking maybe they're right." Sarah nodded vigorously. "But then, I realized that if I don't try to change things, who will? If we don't speak up, nothing gets better." David, who had been quietly thoughtful throughout their conversation, added, "My dance teacher says that being different isn't wrong, it's just different. And different can be beautiful." These conversations, filmed over several weeks, transformed the documentary from a simple family portrait into something more profound: an exploration of childhood resilience, the importance of inclusive education, and the power of authentic representation. But perhaps the most moving segment came from James's natural interactions with the children they met. His ability to connect with others, to ask simple questions that cut to the heart of complex emotions, and to offer comfort through his presence rather than his words, demonstrated a form of intelligence that traditional education often overlooked. When 5-year-old Emma Rodriguez, whose family had immigrated from Guatemala, shyly shared that she sometimes felt left out because her English wasn't perfect, James simply said, "I think you're brave for learning 2 languages. I only know one, so you're smarter than me about words." His innocent validation, captured on camera, sparked conversations about multilingual education and the value of diverse perspectives in classrooms. As the weeks of filming continued under their new approach, Catherine watched her children grow in confidence and empathy. They began to see their own struggles not as personal failures, but as part of the human experience that connected them to children everywhere. The documentary, originally conceived as a way to humanize the royal family, had evolved into something more significant: a catalyst for conversations about education, childhood development, and the importance of celebrating individual differences. But, perhaps most importantly, it had shown Catherine and William that their instinct to protect their children through privacy might be less valuable than protecting them through authenticity. By allowing the world to see their real struggles and growth, they had created space for their children to be genuinely themselves, supported by a community that understood their journey. As Catherine tucked Alexander into bed one evening after a particularly emotional day of filming, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mummy, I'm glad people know that princes can be bad at math," he said. "Maybe now other kids won't feel so alone when school is hard." In that moment, Catherine knew they had made the right choice. The crown would always be part of their children's identity, but it no longer had to define the limits of their humanity. 6 months after the documentary aired, Catherine stood in the gardens of Westmore Palace watching Alexander teach a group of visiting children how to identify different types of clouds. His confidence had transformed remarkably since that tearful morning when he declared himself stupid at maths. Now, at 9 years old, he moved through the world with the quiet assurance of a child who understood his own worth. "That one's a cumulus," he explained to 8-year-old Maya, whose family had written to the palace after watching the documentary. "They're the fluffy ones that look like cotton balls. My tutor says they form when warm air rises and cools, but I think of them as nature's way of making art in the sky." Catherine smiled at her son's poetic explanation. The educational revolution they'd implemented after visiting Millbrook Primary had exceeded all expectations. Alexander still struggled with traditional mathematics, but he discovered a gift for pattern recognition and spatial reasoning that served him well in his future leadership studies. More importantly, he'd learned that intelligence came in many forms, and his particular combination of empathy, creativity, and analytical thinking was exactly what the world needed from its future leaders. "Your Majesty," came a voice behind her. Catherine turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen approaching with a warm smile. The former head teacher of Millbrook Primary had accepted Catherine's invitation to become the palace's Director of Educational Innovation, helping to design learning experiences that honored each child's unique gifts. "How's our cloud identification seminar going?" Dr. Chen asked, gesturing toward the group of children scattered across the lawn. "Look for yourself," Catherine replied, pointing toward where Isabella was organizing a weather forecasting competition with scientific precision that would have impressed any meteorologist. "Teams need to observe cloud patterns, wind direction, and atmospheric pressure indicators," Isabella announced to her eager audience. "But, remember, the goal isn't just to be right about tomorrow's weather, it's to understand how different pieces of information work together to help us make good predictions." At 7 years old, Isabella had grown into her role as a natural leader while maintaining the fierce independence that Catherine both admired and occasionally worried about. The cricket team controversy from the documentary had led to real changes, not just at her school, but at institutions across the Commonwealth, as young girls cited Princess Isabella's example when advocating for equal opportunities in sports and academics. "She's remarkable," Dr. Chen observed. "Have you seen the latest letters from schools implementing her Princess Protocol for gender equality in athletics?" Catherine had indeed seen the letters, hundreds of them, from educators who had used Isabella's straightforward approach to challenging unfair rules as a framework for addressing inequality in their own institutions. The Princess Protocol, a name Isabella had coined herself, involved asking 3 simple questions. Is this rule fair to everyone? Does this rule help people or limit people? What would happen if we changed this rule to be more inclusive? The impact has been extraordinary, Catherine agreed. But what amazes me most is how she's learned to channel her passion for justice into practical solutions rather than just passionate protests. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter from across the garden, where James was leading a group in what appeared to be an elaborate game involving weather-related charades. At 6 years old, he had fully embraced his role as the family's emotional intelligence specialist, though he would have been puzzled by such a formal description of his natural gift for making others feel valued and understood. "James, what weather are you acting out?" called one of the visiting children. James spun in circles with his arms outstretched, his face tilted toward the sky with pure joy. "I'm being sunshine after a storm," he announced. "You know how everything feels extra beautiful when the sun comes out after rain? That's what I'm being." Catherine watched as the other children immediately understood not just the weather phenomenon James was portraying, but the emotional truth behind his interpretation. This was his gift, the ability to find and share the emotional core of any experience, helping others connect with feelings they might not have been able to articulate themselves. The child's psychology reports from his school visits have been fascinating, Dr. Chen mentioned quietly. Teachers are saying that James's approach to emotional validation is changing how they handle difficult conversations with their students. Indeed, James's natural responses during the documentary had sparked interest from child development specialists worldwide. His instinctive understanding that feelings were always valid, even when behaviors needed guidance, had influenced training programs for teachers, parents, and child care professionals across multiple countries. "Your Royal Highness," interrupted Mrs. Morrison, Catherine's private secretary, approaching with the respectful urgency that indicated important news. "The Secretary of Education has arrived for your meeting about the National Learning Differences Initiative." Catherine nodded, but before heading inside, she took a moment to observe her 3 children in their natural habitat, teaching, leading, and nurturing with the unconscious grace that came from growing up secure in their own worth and clear about their purpose in the world. The meeting with the Secretary of Education, Dr. Patricia Williams, focused on implementing the learning approaches the royal family had pioneered on a national scale. The documentary had generated unprecedented public interest in educational reform, particularly around supporting children with different learning styles and emotional needs. "The preliminary results from pilot programs are extraordinary," Dr. Williams reported as they settled in Catherine's office. "Schools implementing strength-based learning approaches are seeing improvements not just in academic performance, but in student confidence, peer relationships, and overall mental health." Catherine reviewed the data with satisfaction but not surprise. They had witnessed these improvements firsthand with their own children and the many young people they'd worked with through the documentary project and its aftermath. "What's most encouraging," Dr. Williams continued, "is the response from teachers. Many are saying this approach has renewed their passion for education and helped them remember why they became teachers in the first place." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock, followed by Alexander peering around the door with characteristic politeness. "Sorry to interrupt, Mummy, but Maya's family is leaving soon, and she wanted to give you something." Catherine excused herself and returned to the garden, where Maya stood waiting with a carefully crafted drawing. "It's a picture of what I learned today," Maya explained shyly, offering Catherine a colorful drawing that showed children of various backgrounds working together under a bright sky filled with different types of clouds. "Can you tell me about it?" Catherine asked, kneeling to Maya's eye level. "Well, Prince Alexander taught us about clouds, and Princess Isabella showed us how to work as a team, and Prince James made everyone feel happy and included," Maya said. "But the most important thing I learned is that everyone is good at different things, and when we work together, we can understand the whole sky." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the profound simplicity of this child's insight. This was exactly what they had hoped to achieve, not just changing how people viewed the royal family, but changing how children viewed themselves and each other. As the visiting families departed, Catherine gathered her own children for their evening reflection time, a tradition they developed during the documentary filming that had become a cherished part of their routine. "What did you discover about yourselves today?" Catherine asked as they settled into the comfortable circle they'd created in the family sitting room. "I discovered that teaching other people actually helps me learn too," Alexander said thoughtfully. "When I had to explain cloud formation to Maya, I understood it better myself." Isabella nodded eagerly. "And I learned that being a leader isn't just about making decisions, it's about helping everyone contribute their best ideas." James, who had been building with blocks while listening to his siblings, looked up with his characteristic earnestness. "I learned that when people feel happy and safe, they're braver about trying new things." William, who had joined them after his own meetings, listened to each child's reflection with the pride that came from watching them grow into their authentic selves. "You know," he said, "when I was your age, I thought being a prince meant being perfect at everything. But watching you 3 has taught me that real leadership comes from understanding your strengths, being honest about your challenges, and always looking for ways to help others succeed." As bedtime approached, Catherine reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that morning when Alexander had shared his fears about public speaking and she had made the decision to pursue authentic storytelling rather than manufactured perfection. The documentary, titled Growing Up Royal, The Real Story, had won international acclaim not for its glamorous portrayal of palace life, but for its honest exploration of childhood development, family dynamics, and the universal challenges of growing up. More importantly, it had sparked a global conversation about education, emotional intelligence, and the importance of celebrating individual differences. But perhaps the most significant change had been within their own family. The children had learned that their value came not from meeting impossible standards of perfection, but from their willingness to be authentic, to learn from mistakes, and to use their unique gifts in service of others.
"Mummy," Alexander said as she tucked him into bed, "do you think other children feel better about themselves after watching our story?" "What do you think?" Catherine asked, turning his question back to him in the way that had become their tradition. Alexander considered this seriously.
"I think maybe they do, because now they know that even future kings have to work hard at things and sometimes feel nervous.
Maybe that makes it okay for them to have feelings too."
Isabella, overhearing from the next room, called out, "And they know that girls can do anything boys can do, and that it's okay to speak up when something isn't fair." From his room, James added his own observation, "And they know that being kind is the most important thing of all." As Catherine kissed each child goodnight, she marveled at their wisdom and resilience. They had not only survived the experience of sharing their most vulnerable moments with the world, they had thrived because of it. The authenticity that had initially felt risky had become their greatest protection, allowing them to move through the world with confidence and purpose. Later that evening, as Catherine and William sat together reviewing letters from families around the world who had been touched by their story, William voiced what they were both thinking.
"Do you think we've changed the future of the monarchy?" he asked. Catherine considered the question carefully.
"I think we've changed what it means to serve while remaining human," she said finally. "Our children will inherit the crown, but they'll also inherit the knowledge that their greatest power comes from their willingness to be vulnerable, to learn, and to connect with others through shared humanity rather than elevated position." Outside their window, the palace grounds were quiet under a star-filled sky that Alexander would undoubtedly want to study tomorrow, Isabella would want to navigate by, and James would want to make wishes upon. These three remarkable children, who happened to be princes and princess, would continue to grow and learn and challenge the world's expectations of what royal leadership could look like. But tonight, they were simply sleeping peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved exactly as they were, valued for their unique contributions, and trusted to grow into their own authentic versions of the people they were meant to become. The revolution they had started wasn't about changing the monarchy, it was about changing what it meant to be human in a world that often demanded perfection over authenticity. And, in that quiet palace, under that star-filled sky, three children dreamed dreams that would shape not just their own futures, but the future of everyone they would someday serve.
The Princess of Wales had indeed opened up about the realities of raising royal children.
But, more than that, she had opened up new possibilities for what childhood, parenthood, and leadership could look like when built on a foundation of authentic love, genuine acceptance, and the revolutionary belief that being real was always better than being perfect. As Catherine fell asleep that night, she knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, her children would meet them with confidence, compassion, and the unshakable knowledge that they were enough, exactly as they were. And, perhaps, in a world that desperately needed that message, that was the most royal gift of all.